Today we're going to find out if overheating with the Lumix flagships is a thing of the past. Panasonic just released a firmware update for the S1II and the S1RII and the S1II. There are a couple of new features that we're going to go through briefly, but the most important thing is that Panasonic addressed problems with the heat management of these cameras, significantly improving recording times without overheating.
We are going to test if Panasonic's claims are conservative or exaggerated, simply by letting the S1R2 and the S1II run in many different settings, until they melt, or not. We're going to test the difference that the thermal management settings and the vent speed makes. This should help you to get a better idea of what to expect in moderate and in hot environments. We set up a real torture chamber with around 40 degrees Celsius or 105 degrees Fahrenheit and an artificial sun to emulate a desert shooting. Can the S1R2 survive this baptism of fire, and how long will it record 8K OpenGate in this hellish environment?
This should give you a good idea what settings will maximize your runtimes in a volcano, and that test is really surprising and enlightening. Stay put to find out. Of course, we're talking about the other new features and bug fixes that the firmware brings. Panasonic has updates for their flagships, and that means that you can now install firmware version 1.2 to the S1II and S1II and version 1.3 to the S1R2. The really important part, at least for those that are using their cameras primarily for their stunning video abilities, is of course the thermal control algorithm. Don't blame me, that's how Panasonic chose to call it. Whatever the name, it promises way longer recording times, especially on the S1R2 that had some overheating problems.
Of course, there are a couple of other features that come with the new firmware, and that is the addition of a low speed option when you use the burst mode in photography. With the high frame rates, the cache will saturate very quickly, so if you're in a situation where you prefer a longer burst where you don't require as many frames, the new low speed option will be your friend. The S1II will have a new 30 frames per second option and the S1R2 a 20 frames per second option. We also get some improvements for the autofocus, which will give you an enhanced tracking stability through algorithm improvements. Besides that, you can change the interface to only display a small rectangle around the eye if you find the default version too distracting. With multi-subjects, you can now set the camera to only mark the main subject. A new video feature is MP4 Lite that can record UHD in 30 and 25 frames per second with 50 megabits per second for those extra long shots with small cards.
For me, and I think for many existing and potential users of the flagship lineup, overheating is one of the major problems with the S1R2 and in very rare cases even with the S1II. Here's the problem.
We did a review of the S1R2 when it was released in February, and we didn't have any overheating problems at all. First of all, we were in the Arctic cycle during that presentation, and that climate doesn't really promote overheating. But even back in our much milder Middle Europe climate, we didn't encounter any overheating issues, which might be because we simply never recorded those endless shots that you might need when you do long interviews, weddings or events. Or maybe it was because there was something different in the first firmware. In any way, when the S1II came out, it was summer here, temperatures were quite a bit higher, and we had our first overheating warning filming an interview in 8K, after something like 20 minutes. In the future, we had that problem again and again, often when the camera was just on and displaying an image for long times, like you do when you shoot content for a channel or you're setting up something in your studio. You need an image for that, and it's not acceptable when a camera shuts down due to overheating just when you're ready to shoot, or worse, while you're shooting.
This is why I gave a fair warning to those that do events or weddings in the past, for obvious reasons.
That is not to say that this is a permanent problem. We shot for prolonged times over hours for a comparison test between the S1II and the S1R2 and didn't have problems. We did have the van running in high mode, which does ruin audio recording with the internal microphones, not something you really want if you shoot an event. The S1II generally has very few problems in that department. Like when we attached it to a crane for behind-the-scenes footage for a virtual production episode. It often ran for hours, fire and forget, in a relatively warm studio with default settings without any problems. Still, I managed to get some heat warnings during long takes in other situations, causing forced breaks.
What seems to be a key part of the problem are CFExpress Type B cards that can get very hot over time, and some more than others. This Angelbird 1TB card gets quite a bit hotter than the SanDisk, with predictable results. Runtimes are generally much longer when you use SD cards instead of CFExpress. Also, if you're not recording to the CFExpress card, it will produce heat while it's mounted in the camera. So if you really are pushing for hour-long shots, just remove the CFExpress card completely. It goes without saying that you should avoid placing the camera in direct sunlight or into the beam of a strong incandescent light, like it is true for about every compact camera. There was one more rumor, and that is that Panasonic's own batteries would produce more heat than third-party batteries. But having some third-party batteries, we could not see a difference. Panasonic also released a list of features that increase the camera's temperature due to higher processor workloads. And those include crop zoom, hybrid zoom, E-stabilization, high dynamic range boost on the S1II, dynamic range expansion on the S1R2, false color, and live view when it's set to image priority.
One of the keys for much improved recording times is to set the thermal management settings to high instead of the default standard mode. That doesn't mean that you have to live with loud van noise. The only difference seems to be that the camera is allowed to get much hotter. So hot that Panasonic has this warning in the interface stating that you should use the high mode only on a tripod because you could injure yourself holding the camera, which is ridiculous of course, as you will see in our test.
Thank God Panasonic is one of the companies that does listen to feedback and acts on it too. Now they address the issue with a firmware update claiming much improved continuous recording times. Given a test environment with the ambient temperature of 23 degrees Celsius, that is 73.4 Fahrenheit, Panasonic promises unlimited recording times on the S1II, even with standard thermal management. Except for 120 frames per second in 4K. With high thermal management, you can still shoot approximately 1 hour continuously to SD card. Of course, we're going to put that to the test.
For the S1R2, Panasonic's prediction looks a bit different. For 8K 30 frames per second H.265 and with standard thermal management, runtimes are improved from 20 to 25 minutes, but from 20 to 50 minutes with high thermal management when using SD cards. And if you try Cinema 4K at 60 frames per second, recording time went up from 20 minutes in standard to 30 minutes in high mode.
At least that is Panasonic's approximation, and boy will we test that right now. Let's start with the S1R2 as it's more affected by overheating. Here is our test environment and our settings.
We have the camera in a room with an ambient temperature of around 22 degrees Celsius or 72 degrees Fahrenheit and a humidity of around 40%. As it was night and it was cooling outside, we had a bit of a temperature drop in the beginning, but we simply added a little heater that raised the temperature back up. 22 degrees is not particularly cold or warm, wearing just a t-shirt is comfortable, and we have a tungsten light focused on the camera to simulate a bit of a sun. This resembles an environment of a late summer afternoon, at least in Central Europe. The camera's internal vans is set to Auto 1, which means that the van is running most of the time, but dynamically to keep the temperature down. You can hear it when it's really silent in the room, but I wouldn't consider it a problem even if you record audio. We are powering the camera with an original Panasonic battery. If a setting reaches 2 hours of recording time without a heat warning, we will consider that setting no limit. Round 1 with the S1R2. We are recording 8K to H.265 on a 128GB SanDisk Extreme Pro SD card. There's no CFExpress card in the body. We are a channel for filmmakers, so we are using 24 frames per second most of the time, and we'll do that here too. The common 25 frames per second standard will not have any significant difference here. If the battery is empty or the card is full, we are quickly reset and continue recording without the camera having time to cool down. Panasonic with their test measures 20 minutes runtime in firmware 1.2 and predicts an improvement to approximately 25 minutes. Of course we won't bore you to tears and speed the recording up. Still, this is a one take, so you see that there's no letting the camera cool down, bends, or other shenanigans going on. The camera blasts right through 20 minutes, 25, 30, 40, 50, and no heat warning. After 1 hour of continuous shooting, we had to format the SD card and swap the battery. We did that as fast as possible and continued shooting without giving the camera time to cool down. And it goes on and on and on. As we approached 2 hours, we didn't really understand what was going on. For a second, I thought we might have left the camera in high temperature management, but no, we're on standard. 8K 24 frames per second H.265 2SD card gets our no limit. That is so much better than what Panasonic tested. Would 1 degree difference be that significant? Or is it the frame rate? Now, here's the weird thing. Before we shot this for the channel, we did a dress rehearsal, and as you can see here, we did film the exact same thing, just with zero effort. We have the exact same settings and the same temperature in the room, and we got a heat warning. After 30 minutes. Already recording 5 minutes longer than the Panasonic prediction, but their test was also with 30 frames per second. Even with the heat warning, the S1R2 goes on and on, almost filling up the card before going into cool down mode. Even in this test, Panasonic's 25 minutes of recording time was very conservative. After a cooldown, we repeated the same test here with high thermal management. Now, we filled the card with almost 1 hour of recording time without a heat warning. We formed the SD and changed the battery and just keep running. Still, no heat warning, approaching 2 hours. We form it and cycle the battery a third time. And we still go on and on, without even a warning. With high settings, we definitely get no limit rating. We know that CFExpress cards get much hotter, so we switched the same recording setup to the SanDisk 320GB and removed the SD card from the body. Panasonic's test predicts an improvement of 15 to 20 minutes with the firmware update. Everything runs smoothly, way past that number. At 40 minutes, we finally get a heat warning, but the camera keeps recording bravely. 5, 10, 20 more minutes while the warning flashes continuously. Blasting past 1 hour, the camera finally gives in, and the battery does the same thing. We quickly change and the camera is in cooldown mode. The cooldown mode switches off all heat producing parts of the camera but runs the internal fan at max speed to bring you back into the game as soon as possible, which is quite a bit of time, 6 minutes in this case. After the camera cooled down, you have to power cycle the camera and we restart the recording immediately. Will we get a reduced runtime? In our post-cooldown run, we get a heat warning after 30 minutes, 10 minutes earlier than in our initial run. This means that you have to expect shorter runs after a cooldown. For our next round, we choose a higher frame rate for those who like to shoot that style. 60 frames per second in Cinema 4K 422 to SD card. For this, we also changed the system frequency to 60 Hz, the standard in the US and Japan. This will match Panasonic's test. To mix things up, we set thermal management to high. Here, Panasonic predicts an improvement from 20 to 30 minutes. Let's see how significant the differences in frame rates are. Is that what makes our numbers so much better? We also turned the heater a bit up to match Panasonic's 23 degrees Celsius or even go above that. 20 minutes. 30 minutes. Here we exceeded Panasonic's prediction and no heat warning so far. 55 minutes and the battery is dead. We continue recording after a super quick power cycle. 1 hour. Two hours. That is enough for wedding ceremonies, concerts, events, and who knows how long the S1R2 could go on. Giving the 30 minutes prediction, this is a truly surprising no limit. Let's try how serious we have to take Panasonic's health warning. It's definitely hot, but not too hot to touch or carry around using the handle indefinitely. This feels more like a mildly warm cup of coffee in the hand. And with this insight, we're going to leave the S1R2 in high mode. There doesn't seem to be a good reason not to. As Panasonic themselves predicts no limit with Cinema 4K in 30 frames per second, at least in high thermal management, we will take them at their word. With this test, we are convinced that the Panasonic test results are extremely conservative and you can generally expect much better numbers in real life.
Counterintuitively, RAW formats need less processing power than H.264 or H.265. But of course, their high data rates require CFExpress cards and transfer speeds that turn them into lava. I will assume that you don't shoot super long takes in RAW, and Panasonic didn't give any prediction here. So I'm curious. Let's find out.
We record the best possible RAW codec, and that is ProRes HQ in 5.8K, and we stay at 24 frames per second. As our SanDisk CF with 320 GB will only last 12 minutes, we will go for the larger but hotter AngelBud 1 TB. That will last us a while, if we don't overheat. We are in high thermal management. There is a 27-minute limit to the length of a RAW recording. I can't tell you why, maybe it's a file size restriction, but we simply restart the recording and fill up the rest of the card. After 30 minutes, the fan kicks into a higher gear. Audible if you're right next to it, but nothing too serious. After 40 minutes, the S1R2 filled the 1 TB card without a heat warning. We will give RAW recording a no limit. I know it's not 2 hours, but here you will be more limited by your media size than by heat.
Let's do one more test. 23 degrees Celsius is still a moderate temperature, but what if you are somewhere in the desert, or worse, in a parking lot in LA? Let's go for a torture round.
For this, we will put a heater on full power and right next to the setup. This will give us a hot desert wind, and we will put the 200 watt tungsten close to a setup, giving us a gleaming sun. The ambient temperature rises quickly around 40 degrees Celsius or 105 degrees Fahrenheit air temperature. That is like midday in the Sahara, and it feels like it too. The tungsten does its thing and the surface feels hot to the touch, so the camera's already pre-cooked before we start recording. To give the S1R2 a chance and to try something new, we will go for 8K at 24 frames per second, but in OpenGate. More pixels and data to crunch compared to our first 8K test, but this time we set heat management to high to combat the additional environmental heat. Will the S1R2 survive this baptism of fire? Feuer frei. It really gets hot in our home studio. I feel like in a sauna. 8 minutes in and my old iPhone 12 Pro Max gave in and went into heat protection mode. From now on, you will have to orientate yourself on the small timer on the camera monitor. I decided to check the body temperature of the S1R2 just to make sure nothing melts. As we are exceeding the maximum operation temperature of the S1R2, I decided to let the temperature go down a little bit and to save my phone from damage. Meanwhile, the S1R2 handles the situation graciously. A person could not stand where the camera is for more than a couple of minutes. The S1R2 can. "30 minutes in, I checked the camera's body temperature again, just to be safe. Now the camera is definitely hot, especially on the bottom, but not too hot to handle. There is zero chance of injury. 1 hour of 8K OpenGate, close to the ceiling of the camera's temperature envelope. No heat warnings, but we do have to cycle the battery. After an hour of continuous recording in the heat, the camera feels quite hot. You can still easily operate it and hold it at the handle. The bottom starts to be painfully hot. I would not rest it for half an hour on my belly. I hope the glue and the grease in the system doesn't start sweating. The glue of the Velcro holding the thermometer actually does, which is why it finally fell down. 1 hour and 40 minutes in, we exceed 46 degrees Celsius air temperature and the camera finally starts to give a temperature warning. We are plenty over the max operation temperature of the camera here, so we are turning down the heater and attach the thermometer with gaff. 5 minutes later we are in the envelope again, but the warning remains. Shortly before the finishing line, the card is full and we form it quickly and restart. And with that, the heat warning disappeared. Getting the temperature down to 30 degrees surely helped with that. 2 hours of continuous recording of 8K OpenGate in unbearable conditions. And if we keep the air temperature in the 30-degree range, I'm sure we could go on forever. Now, can we touch the camera or will we catch fire? It is actually hot, but not untouchable.
I really thought this would be the death sentence to the S1R2, but what we got is 2 hours of continuous recording. We just failed the no limit because we did get a heat warning 1 hour and 40 minutes in. If you ever come across somebody worrying or complaining about overheating with the S1R2, send him a link to this test. You could shoot a pretty long interview with the devil, in hell, in 8K OpenGate. Consider me impressed, Panasonic. Besides giving me and maybe you a lot more confidence going into the next shooting, this test also shows something else, and that is how little the ambient temperature matters in the context. Recording modes, setting, and especially what card is used is way more relevant than air temperature or infrared radiation. The S1II had very few problems with overheating in the first place. And considering the conservative Panasonic numbers for the S1R2, I'm very confident that the S1II is improved as well. As most modes were already no limit before the upgrade, we don't really have to test those. What I'm interested in is what recording time we can squeeze out of the only format that Panasonic deems limited on the S1II, even with the new firmware, and that is Cinema 4K in 120 frames per second.
Panasonic predicts 60 minutes with high thermal settings, up from only 20 minutes. Our SD card can record almost twice as long, so let's rip. By now we are not surprised that the S1II rips past 60 minutes without any problems. No heat warning, but we had to cycle the battery at 1 hour and 10 minutes, which is an impressive runtime for 120 frames per second that want to be compressed and written to a medium. We run out of card space shortly before reaching 2 hours and decide to leave it at that, as we didn't even get a warning. We will give 4K 120 frames per second on the S1II our no limit rating. With this, I have no doubt that the S1II can handle almost anything, at least at moderate ambient temperatures. The few heat warnings we got with the S1II were all with 6K OpenGate and 24 frames per second, so nothing fancy. Like for our lens data episode where we simply filmed the screen of the Ursa Cinema for 1 hour. The studio was not hot and there were no spots directed on the camera. Is this solved with Firmware 1.2?
Of course, we cannot replicate the exact same circumstances, and like we explained earlier, we had no trouble running OpenGate for hours on our virtual production set. But remember the S1R2 rehearsal shot we showed you earlier? That one was shot on the S1II, and during the second round it filmed the S1R2 for over 3 hours in OpenGate 24 to SD card with standard thermal settings, while being powered by USB. So we decided not to repeat that test and give the S1II a 24 frames per second OpenGate no limit rating. It is time for our verdict. Panasonic seems to have delivered an impressive fix to the overheating problems that users have encountered. Thanks for that, Panasonic. Now it's also much clearer how to avoid overheating if you really have those endless shots in hot environments. Set the thermal management to high and the internal vent to auto 1. No need to ruin your audio with high vent settings. Avoid the camera features that produce additional heat and use SD cards rather than CF cards for H.264 and H.265 recordings. It is great to see that the problems that we had with the S1R2 are pretty much over when you set the thermal management to high. 24, 25 and 30 frames per second are practically no limit even at 8K, as long as you're using SD cards. If you're a wedding filmer or you shoot endless interviews, I would still recommend the S1II, but largely for other reasons. If you're after the higher resolution for photos or video, it is good to know that the S1R2 can go the distance if it has to. Results may vary depending on the given environment, but a torture test makes me very optimistic. Still, every camera has a limit. The new firmware is a must for every S1II and S1R2 user. Talking about overheating, the whole test was shot on a Lumix S1II that basically ran non-stop for 20 hours using USB power, assist and cycling SD card in continuous shooting mode, without ever breaking in sped. S1II, you are a real trooper. This does conclude the episode, and we simply didn't have the chance to film more in different situations before the firmware officially released. It will be interesting to see if those who had problems, especially in the hotter places of the planet, can now get the recording times that they need. Let us know in the comments how the firmware upgrade changed your experience in that regard. Hope to see you soon here in the Media Division. We are working on many interesting things for you. Until then, shoot something amazing.